Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Bluetons. That's right, as promised, I'm going to show you how to make blue cheese croutons, which, if everything goes according to plan here, will one day be commonly referred to as Bluetons. You know, I should probably trademark that. But anyway, you may have seen these delicious crispy nuggets on our recently posted roasted apple and parsnip soup. And I told you I was going to show you how to make them, and that's what I'm about to do. So for our first step here, of course, we're going to have to cut up some bread. And unlike most standard crouton recipes, we're actually going to use fresh bread. I really think using the fresh bread for this gives you a crouton that's slightly less hard. Even though the final product's going to come out crisp no matter what you use. But sometimes they're really hard crispy instead of sort of crumbly crispy. Does that make any sense at all? I will try to explain that further on the blog post. So I'm going to do about half a loaf here, and I'm going to cut that into about half-inch thick slices. And then we'll just cut those slices down this way, and then of course into cubes. And I really think somewhere between a ½ and 1 inch is the perfect crouton size. Once you get bigger than that, you're risking some serious roof-of-the-mouth abrasions. Besides, you go to stick a giant crouton with a fork, and a lot of times it shatters and flies off your plate, which is embarrassing. So I'm not a big fan of the giant crouton. And by the way, I really had to edit this pretty tight because I forgot to lock the wheels on my table, and I found this shaking to be distracting and annoying. So let's fast forward to when these are all cut, and what we'll do is we'll toss those in a bowl, and we will start the blue cheesing process. And to begin that, we're going to spoon over copious amounts of hot melted butter. I just did mine in the microwave. And I know olive oil is a much more common fat to use when you're making croutons, but with these Bluetons, I really think the butter carries the blue cheese flavor much more effectively. So we're going to dump in a bunch of butter, and then I'm going to start grating in some blue cheese. And you're probably thinking, how can you grate in blue cheese? It's way too sticky. Well, not if the cheese is frozen, it's not. So before you start this, make sure you throw your blue cheese in the freezer until it firms up. And that way you should be able to grate it in nice small pieces like this. And what we'll do is we'll grate some in, and we'll give that a toss, and those pieces of blue cheese are going to quickly soften and mix with the butter, and hopefully get smeared all over those bread cubes. So I'm going to give it a mix, and then I'm going to give it another grating of blue cheese. Of course, how much you put on is up to you, but if you can, try to put on the perfect amount. So we'll grate on some more, we'll mix that up. Of course, if your cubes seem like they need a little more butter, put some in. Mine didn't look that way, but I added a little anyway. And then I'm going to give it another grating of blue cheese, and I'll mix that in. And by the way, the only reason I'm using a spoon here is because I didn't want to get blue cheese on my camera. But you know what? For this type of operation, your hands are so much better. So I switched, and I finished that off with my bare hands. And then once we think our bread cubes are sufficiently smeared with butter and blue cheese, we'll go ahead and transfer those onto a lined baking sheet and spread them out a little bit. And at that point, it's pretty much ready for the oven. Except I decided to do one more grating over the top, because I figured if there was going to be a problem with these croutons, it wouldn't be from too much blue cheese, it would be from not enough. So I grated on a little extra, and at that point we're going to place it in the center of a 350-degree oven for about 15-20 minutes, at which point it should look like this and just be starting to get golden. And what we'll do is we'll take a spatula and give that a good mix before we grate over a little more blue cheese, which by the way was returned to the freezer so it stays nice and firm. So like I said, give those a toss, and then we'll grate over a little more blue cheese and place those back in the oven until they are beautifully browned and crunchy. And sure, if you want, you can pull those out, give another toss, add a little more cheese. That's up to you. You are the Louis Vuitton of your blue cheese crouton. So it's up to you to discover how much is too much. Having said that, you probably can't put too much on these, but I know a few you will try. But anyway, believe it or not, I didn't add any more blue cheese. I just cooked those for another 15 or 20 minutes until they were beautifully browned and perfectly crispy. Check it out. There's no fork scrape today, but I will prove it by running my fingers through. And yes, that was a little hot and painful, but I quickly forgot about that once I started admiring how amazing these were. I mean, it looks just like a regular crouton pretty much, but when you bite in, it has a beautifully buttery and fairly intense blue cheese flavor. I was just absolutely thrilled with how these came out. But anyway, that's it. Blue cheese croutons, or Bluetons, as I'm attempting to brand them. As you saw, they made a beautiful garnish for vegetable soup. Obviously, these would rock any salad's world. And I just thought of a homework assignment. What about a buffalo chicken wing inspired soup that features these as a garnish? I know, that could be great. But anyway, whether you try that or not, I really do hope you give these a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.